Okay, all these. All right, folks, this is getting a little deep in here, so we will get started. Welcome, everyone. It is Thursday, December 28th, 2023, and this meeting of the MAPC Advanced Plans Committee is called to order. We'll
Deborah,
start.
I'd like to make a motion that we allow Bob Dool to be a full member of the board this morning.
Well, he's going to stay. I think he's still technically an alternate, but I don't know. If he wants to switch over and join us, I'd be delighted. Of course, now wait a minute. He's the chair. That'd make me, no, we can't do that. No. All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, it was a thought. Okay, I'm here. Chuck Warren is not here. Joe Johnson is here. You, Nix, absent. Cindy Miles, absent. John McKay, Tony Zimbelman, and Bob Dool. And we will ask, and Mr. Dool is going to stay, bless his heart, so that gives us 5. I believe he counts even though he's an alternate, so a quorum of 5, and we will proceed. The first.
John, you might.
Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, John, you might say something about Hugh Nix.
Well, I think Hugh has back operations. Hugh's had back operations, as you well know. I talked to him yesterday. He says they can't sit to a morning session and an afternoon session. You see him, he gets up and leans against the wall and everything. So that's the reason why he's not here this morning. Because I asked him if he's going to be here, and he said, no, he'll be this afternoon, but not this morning.
So that would be a good reason to change our meeting day to something separate from the same day, but we already had that discussion.
Boy, is there a bunch of lobbying going on this morning?
Well, it was a point. Okay.
And we could take up my motion again to allow virtual board members.
That would be an option too. Would like to see happen. Okay, but apparently it's not up for discussion right at this moment. Let's move on to item 2 on the agenda. Approve the previous meeting summary. Has everybody had a chance to look it over? Are there any changes or corrections?
Move for approval.
Was that Joe? Yeah, we have a motion from Mr. Johnson and a second from Mr. Kay to approve the previous meeting summary. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed say no. Were you here last time, Bob? I don't think you were. No, so that would be 401. Right, item 3, solar energy conversion systems moratorium. Mr. Wadle.
Well, I'm going to defer to Justin on this one.
Good with that.
All right. So, good morning, everybody. Happy holidays. Justin Constantino with the Planning Department. It looks like my slide might be just a couple slides forward, but that's okay. I think I can probably start here, and there we go. Yeah, that's a good spot. Okay, so just to give you guys a quick background, again, we covered this at our last meeting back in mid-December, but just to give you a background, a reminder on what happened with the Solar Town Hall event. We had that event in mid-November, and we had well over 100 people in the room, 87 sign-ins, and individuals attended that meeting and provided their thoughts on large-scale utility solar. We had general comment cards, and then we had individual boards with individual topics pertaining to large-scale utility solar, where individuals were allowed to post their thoughts and comments regarding those particular topics. So just a quick recap, what you're seeing on the screen here are the results from that town hall event. Urban development and growth, decommissioning, groundwater contamination, and size and configuration were really the 4 main items that came out of that they were just general concerns and general comments regarding those 4 items pertaining to large-scale utility solar. Next slide, please. And then after that, we had the survey. The survey was online from November 16th through the 28th. We had about 163 individuals submit surveys, And what we did was we broke down those survey questions based on our existing unified zoning code as it pertains to solar regulations. So each topic was asked, how do you feel about our current code as it relates to setbacks? Should it be kept the same? Should it change? Or do you have any other thoughts on that? And the same with decommissioning, the same with environment. So each individual topic had its own question on the survey, and as I mentioned, we had 163 responses. And as it plays out, shown here on the screen, again, setbacks, 14%, decommissioning, urban development and growth, wildlife, and the rest of it at 7%, groundwater, less regulations, pro-wind. But what we were able to do, and I'll go to the next slide, please. What we were able to do basically was to take both of those themes that we gathered from both the town hall event and the survey and rank them. So again, this is just a recap, but as you can see, there are some parallels between some of the themes mentioned at both the town hall and the survey. Next slide, please. Those themes were urban development and growth, decommissioning, again, groundwater concern, and then the setbacks was the number one topic at the on the survey. So basically, everything that we have here, we discussed those at our December 14th meeting, and we'll go to the next slide, please. And we boiled those themes down to these four. At our December 14th meeting, we had some discussion about these four particular themes, and we received general consensus from all of you to sort of proceed and do some additional research on these and see how we could potentially, if at all, fit any kind of changes or any new ideas or anything into the Unified Zoning Code or the Comprehensive Plan. That pretty much sums up just kind of the recap of how we got to where we are today. Are there any questions from anybody before I proceed with the best practices? Perfect. Let's go to the next slide, please. So again, we took those themes and we're boiling it down into our best practices. That's what we're generally going to cover today. Staff did a lot of research where we went through academic essays, went through different stories, and we looked at other communities to basically come up with some ideas that could potentially translate into recommendations or changes or just general discussion. So let's go to the next slide, please. So staff utilized several sources for our research. Most notably, we used the Solar at Scale guidebook. The guidebook was developed by the American Planning Association and the International City County Management Association. The document's quite comprehensive. It cites 47 unique sources. And what we found when we were doing our research was when we were going through different academic articles and essays was that we would look at it, and then when we compared it back or when we looked back at this Solar at Scale guidebook, that reference was already in there a lot of the time. So we didn't want to duplicate our work, but we did find a lot of really good information, and a lot of it, like I said, is found in this guidebook, but we did have other sources outside of the guidebook as well. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we'll take this topic by topic, and I can pause after each topic for some discussion or comment, or if you'd like, I can roll through them, your call. But let's start with urban development and growth. Again, with best practices, there's pretty limited research specific to large-scale utility facilities in urban growth areas. When we talk about urban growth areas, a lot of the feedback that we received from both the survey and the town hall event was comments about wanting the any kind of large-scale utility solar to be located 3 to 5 miles outside of urban growth areas. That was really the big theme that kind of emerged. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is what we found from other communities. Again, our code is currently at the top as far as the distance goes. We don't really have anything that our current code does not provide any specific language related to urban growth areas, related to large-scale utility solar facilities specifically. We did compare other counties, including Johnson, Douglas, Butler, Reno, Sumner, and Kingman. That is shown on the screen there. Sumner and Kingman, like Sedgwick County, both have no solar regulations as it pertains to the urban growth area. And then Johnson County, 2 miles, Butler County, 3 miles. And I think a lot of that 3 to 5 mile reasoning from people putting that down is because Butler County recently passed some solar regulations, and that is included in there. Let's go to the next slide, please. When I'm talking about urban development and growth, just to bring it into context a little bit, this is our 2035 urban growth areas map. You could see Wichita there kind of in the center right, and then every colored area is a community with their urban growth area. So I think what folks were trying to say was when they want solar 3 to 5 miles outside of an urban growth area, it would generally be 3 to 5 miles outside of those colored areas. So just to provide a little bit of context, this map is a map that we utilize regularly in the planning department, but just to provide some context on this particular topic, I think that is generally what people are discussing. I will stop there on this particular topic and answer any questions.
I have one. It seems to me that there's basically two issues going on here. One is, I mean, if you look at, for instance, Butler County, they've got Andover, which is one of the, if not the fastest growing cities in the state, I think. So for them, a longer distance clear makes more sense because for them, the city may actually want that land for housing development or commercial or whatever. But if you're talking about some little rural community out in ag country that hasn't had any population growth in the last 30 or 40 years, if they want it 3 to 5 miles away, I think it's basically they just don't want to look at it, which is a separate thing. So do we somehow differentiate between those two situations, or can we, or should we, or have you considered that as a issue?
For the sake of this research, we haven't really done that. I mean, this is pretty much just what the map shows. I think you're right with Andover circumstances, but I know that each community has different regulations and different outlooks for the next 10 years. So I think that certainly plays a role into it, but that's not something that we considered as part of this.
All right, well, I would suggest that maybe we do at least in the issue. I mean, we've got Derby, which is growing, but a lot of the west side communities really aren't. And I think it does make a difference in the distance that's reasonable. John, did you have something you wanted?
The only thing about with Andover, they're not in our county, which we have no jurisdiction over whatsoever. And
I know, but we were using them as an example.
I know what you're saying, but looking at this map, I can see where those 3 towns to the west, Goddard, Garden Plain, and Cheney, could all go together and set up a grid of their own and make it very co-op rather than individual towns, what I guess I'm trying to say.
All right, any other comments on this section? Scott?
Yeah, just one quick one, which is just that I think Justin's done a great job of highlighting, kind of what the differences are between our existing regulations and what other communities have in place. One thing that I would add is that in our existing regulations, if there is a proposed application within one of the urban growth areas of a small city, that they would have the opportunity to formally request that to decide whether or not that should be heard by their planning commission. And then once it is heard by their planning commission, that recommendation is carried forward through the process. So in that way, other cities with growth areas in Sedgwick County have an opportunity to weigh in on whether or not in this case, a commercial scale or utility scale solar project would be appropriate in their urban growth area.
Okay, thank you. Next topic, I guess.
Next slide, please. So the next topic was decommissioning. Of all 4 topics that we did research on, this one probably had the most information. The basically just kind of run through our existing regulations, so you're aware. Right now, we do have a decommissioning plan for solar. The applicant shall provide a site and facility reclamation and decommissioning plan, so a plan is required. That plan indicates the planned life of the solar system and the means by which the facility and its site will be decommissioned. If the permit's granted, the plan shall be updated every 5 years. These are our existing regulations. It should be updated every 5 years until the site reclamation and decommissioning are complete. Before final inspection by public officials, the applicant shall provide evidence that the decommissioning plan and amendments have been recorded with the Register of Deeds. And the reclamation and decommissioning plan shall provide that at the end of the project's life, that all or an appropriate portion of the site's equipment and access roads shall be removed. Basically, we will review that process and make sure that the condition is agreed upon by the landowner and the solar owner, operator, and developer, and that the landowner may choose to leave the access road intact if they so wish. So that's what our existing code says. When we were looking at best practices, a lot of the documents, these are kind of things on the screen that we do not have in our current code. One of the things that it mentions is specifying the depth at which the structure itself should be removed. The typical standard is 3 to 4 feet. There is also a financial assurance component that was recommended in some documents, requesting financial assurance be provided by the owner and operator, either in a surety bond or a letter of credit. The length of time needed to complete decommissioning, again, our plan sort of addresses this a little bit in the sense that it's a plan that should be updated every 5 years. So that's something that we may already kind of have a pulse on. And then again, a statement that an owner operator will notify the local government in advance of the decommissioning. So those were kind of the main themes that were pulled out of our research of things that don't necessarily exist in our code, and with the example of the top 2 things that are currently not required in our code. I'll stop there on decommissioning and see if you all have any questions on that.
Any questions from commission members? Tony?
There was also, during the programs we put on, some talk about water contamination or groundwater contamination. It doesn't seem like that is addressed in this here. Did you find anything about that?
We did, actually. That will be the next topic, so I can address that in just a moment.
Bob?
Just curious as to what that decommissioning depth of 3 to 4 feet, what is that? Just where the solar panels might have been mounted? Or are you talking about if it took up a quarter of a section, that whole quarter of a section has to be removed 3 to 4 feet?
It's my understanding that it was based on the location of wherever that particular structure was located. So basically, they would be removing the physical structure at a depth by 3 to 4 feet, and that was the average taken from other communities or communities that did have specific language specifying that depth. That was the depth recommended.
Any other questions? I will say I do think adding these 4 things sounds like a good idea, especially the financial assurance. To me, that's an especially good idea. All right, I think we're ready to move on.
All right, next slide, please. Oh, just really quick, on decommissioning, other communities, we did do research on their plans. I would say that ours, as it exists currently, is a bit more in-depth than a lot of other communities are, but every community that we did do research on did have some form of a decommissioning plan. So that's really all that slide says. Next slide, please. Okay, so this gets into groundwater contamination, water quality. Our current code does discuss soils and stormwater in relation to large-scale utility solar. And basically what our current code says is that the applicant shall submit an environmental assessment to EPA standards that addresses the project's impact, if any, on wildlife habitat, bird migration, and projects that their potential to cause bird and bat deaths. or officially licensed flora and fauna and flood zones. So basically, our current code does require that report as it stands right now. Our current code also requires that the applicant provide information that addresses stormwater drainage, soil erosion, sediment control, and will detail how all of those will be addressed, prevented, or enhanced by grading, revegetation, or other standard construction practices in accordance with the recommendations of the Sedgwick County Conservation District. And damage to existing vegetation shall be minimized. Disturbed areas shall be reseeded in accordance with the recommendations of the Sedgwick County Conservation District, and weed control is a part of that as well. So again, our code doesn't specifically address groundwater contamination, but we do have a soils and stormwater section that addresses that. So there's a little bit of crossover on this topic as it stands right now. Excuse me, but as far as best practices, a lot of the language that we found, we didn't find anything specifically on groundwater contamination or evidence that there was significant groundwater contamination as a result of large-scale utility solar. A lot of the language that we did find said that based on how the structure itself was configured, it could, in some instances, improve environmental conditions and enhance ecological functions, specifically if new native or pollinator-friendly ground cover is planted. Generally, if that happens, it can improve water quality by minimizing water use for irrigation, capturing, filtering more runoff. Again, the theme on this particular item seems to be planting perennial native vegetation or pollinated ground cover, providing significant improvement in long-term water quality improvements. So that was a lot of the language that we found on groundwater contamination. But again, the way our current code is written is generally based on soils and stormwater, and we do require a report based on EPA standards.
Okay, any questions for Justin? I have one, just out of curiosity. Bats? Was that sort of left over from wind turbine language, or is there something that solar panels do to interfere with bats that I can't imagine?
I just think we didn't want to leave out bats when we were talking about the potential of flying animals crashing into these potentially. So best to include them.
All right, doesn't hurt anything, but I personally think they're capable of avoiding the structures, but that's just me.
Sure.
Okay, moving on.
All right, next slide, please. And again, with groundwater contamination, just about every community that we found had some sort of soils and stormwater language similar to ours. They all have existing plans. They kind of label them or discuss them differently. They either require a stormwater management plan or a drainage plan as part of the installation of a large scale utility solar unit or units. Or they label it as soil erosion or sediment or storm drainage plans. So a lot of the communities that we surveyed and did research on had similar plans to ours. Next slide, please. So this is the last topic that came up from our 4 that we distinguished at our December 14th meeting. Yeah.
Scott?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Sorry, I wanted to supplement some of the information you've got on the prior slide. So Ty Ben, if we can go back to that. But one thing that I would indicate is that during the annual Kansas chapter of the American Planning Association meeting earlier this year, Douglas County presented on their solar regulations. And one of the things that they've done is they have established a maximum amount, I believe, of the area that can be topsoil that can be disturbed or removed as part of the process. And that is because they really see land banking, at least as it was presented during the conference, they really see it as a way of solar facilities as a way of land banking this agricultural land for future use, because they indicate that the systems last 20, 30 some odd years. At some point the equipment is no longer useful and it needs to be removed, and at that point they want to have soils that are still able to go back into agricultural use. So they regulate how much of the topsoil can be disturbed and removed.
Interesting. Thanks, Scott. Okay, next slide, please. So this is our last topic. We sort of put together setbacks and size and configuration. We put those two items together because a lot of the setback concerns fell under the size and configuration category of our current zoning code. So basically, the way our code currently reads is that it discusses height. It says that the unit shall not exceed 35 feet in height. And then there is also a setback requirement that all solar structures shall be set back from the project boundary lines and public rights-of-way at least 40 feet. Additional setbacks may be required to mitigate site-specific issues or to provide access for road or commercial corridors. So a lot of the best practices information that we found, the general consensus seemed to be that there wasn't a reason to require larger setbacks for solar energy systems than for other permissible uses in a zoning district. A lot of the research that we found when looking at other communities too is that they didn't single out solar, large-scale utility solar projects any different than their normal zoning code. So it still applied to the setback, but it was based on their zoning code. There's even some language that said that it might make sense to reduce the required setback if the host property provides a proper landscape buffer. And then one note from the United States Department of Energy, they did research and they mentioned that extrapolating setbacks throughout the country can reduce solar resources up to 38%, depending on the size of the setbacks applied. So that was the best practices research. Let's go to the next slide, please. As far as other communities, as I mentioned before, Wichita-Sedgwick County, it's 40 feet from the boundary lines and the right-of-way. Johnson County, 50 feet. Douglas, same as their zoning, so whatever the zoning district would be in that particular area, that is where their solar would apply. Butler County, 150 feet from public road. Reno, 100 feet from the right-of-way. Sumner, depends on whether you're looking at it from the front, from the back, and from the side. They have differences on each. And then Kingman, 10 feet setback. I think that might cover us for those four particular topics. Before we open it up to discuss all of those, is there anything on setbacks or size and configuration regarding our current code, or any thoughts that you would like to add on this topic?
John?
My only concern with those is the one of the height regulation, was it 40 feet?
The height, as it currently reads in our code, is 35 feet.
Okay, that seems awful high to me, because these can be done with coming 5 feet off the ground if you really want to know the truth.
Well, do not some of them like go on the top of livestock shelters or whatever, or is that not a commercial issue?
The way the code reads is SECS, which is our standard language for, I guess, large-scale utility solar. But as it currently reads, 35 feet in height, and that may be considering where the location of where it's placed, but I can't speak to that personally.
Any other comments, John, on that, or?
Well, the only ones I've seen, and I know in New Mexico, they've got a number of them, and they're like, 5 to 6 feet. So they can get underneath them and mow, but they're ugly, I guess is the easiest word I can say.
Oh, I find it unlikely that they would be, that's a lot of structure to build for no good reason unless they had some reason, and I can't personally think of a reason. So is it, other than that, it's kind of a standard zoning height limitation? Is there some reason why go ahead?
Thank you. Commissioner McKay, to respond to your concern, the standard height in RR, rural residential, which is probably the district we'll be talking about the most, is 35 feet.
No, I understand that, but I'm just simply stating that we're talking about maybe 10, 15 acres of monuments sitting in the middle of, that's nothing, nowhere. It might be more appealing if it was only 5 to 6, whatever, so you could maintain underneath it and still not have it sticking way up in the air.
Understood. Just wanted to point that
Like
out.
if you go down 35 highway and see the windmills between here and Oklahoma City.
Yes, I have.
Scott, did you want to add, or are you trying to wave me over to JR? Okay, I agree. I think maybe we need to at least think about a lower height. 35 for solar on a commercial scale just seems like it's A, never going to happen, and B, is more height than we would really want to see. I think it's at least worth thinking about. All right, are we done with,
We're done with going through all four of those topics. You're welcome to revisit any of those. We're taking notes on your comments, and I think one thing to consider too as we make these discussions is that the survey itself, as I mentioned at our previous meeting on the 14th, about 55 to 60% of the respondents on that survey did recommend keeping the current code the same on each of these topics. So again, we're drilling down these four topics on the remaining 45 to 50% of folks that wanted either some change or some further discussion on these four topics. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a reminder. Scott?
Scott?
Just a quick question, Justin. So on this one, this is setbacks, and then in terms of size and configuration, did the research that was done show any kind of limitations on how many acres or how many contiguous acres that a solar development could be?
We specifically looked for that information, and there wasn't very much on there about breaking up individual projects or taking one project and breaking it up. So there wasn't information about that, unfortunately.
Tony?
When I was looking at the map you had of the county up there, and then I was kind of envisioning a 3 to 5 mile radius around any city. If you do that, there's not going to be a lot of land left to even deal with. Then you're going to have to find somebody that's willing to sell you some property outside of that area. So in effect, if we do that, aren't we just basically saying you can't do it?
Good question. I hope yes, Scott's taking notes. Excellent. Any other questions from commission members? If we're at that point, I'd like to ask whether there are any members of the public attending here who would like to speak on this item. All right. Yes, come up to the podium, please. You have 3 minutes, and first give us your name and address, please.
My name is Leroy Bosch. My address is 6716 North 135th West, and I'm just going to read a prepared statement on this because basically this is all focusing on the idea of best practices, implementing new regulations. I'm not a paid expert that's come up here to promote desired outcomes. This is pretty much a David and Goliath story of multi-million-dollar corporations using tax dollars to force local municipalities across the United States to engage in activities that are questionable about their long-term interests. We're trading on ideas that the planet can be saved by renewable energy, except that mankind wasn't around destroying the planet when the dinosaurs ceased to exist. My request is that advanced planning does not lose focus on one key element of the discussion, and that is the community investment plan that you all passed in 2015, and the golden rules still apply. There are two components of this community investment plan, water and the renewable energy facilities, that I would like to address. And to quote, securing the long-term water supply. Now, it seems to be the discussion is that there's no concern about water in that, but it seems illogical to me that this would allow to jeopardize the future of Wichita's future water. Solar projects that are under proposal in Reno County do affect 60% of Wichita's drainage and water supply, and the other one's over the aquifer. In a perfect world, there's no disasters occur, and we are assured by the industry experts that no such thing will occur. I think divine intervention will take care of that. Renewable energy facilities. Goal number 1, protect existing cities, land uses, aviation interest, and other private investment as new renewable energy facilities are considered for development. Goal number 2, evaluate renewable energy development proposals based on the best information available as technology continues to evolve. I'd like to address that banning utility scale solar is within reason. Harvey County did it. If not a ban, very tight regulations on your number 1 is second best. Butler County has tight regulations. Utility scale solar in Reno County could help protect, would help protect Wichita's water supply. Wind towers have also been banned as part of your thing. There are 600 communities in the United States that have blocked or banned renewable energy solar projects. And just remember, these things, such as a ban, can always be reversed by a simple vote of the Board of County Commissioners. Regulations that are being developed and discussed now can be reversed. 35 years is a long time.
Thank you, sir. And there was one other person, did I see, or would you like to speak? Please come forward. You have 3 minutes. Please start with your name and address.
Good morning. My name is Tim Mullen. I reside at 6718 North 135th Street West in Colwich. I have 2 points that I'd like to bring to you guys' attention. Point number 1 is the validity of the online survey. I have some doubts as to the validity of it, simply because when we did the survey, you did not have to put your name or your address on your submission. So I don't know whether these were all Sedgwick County residents or if they were other residents from outside of Sedgwick County, outside of the state, who knows? And with 60% of the online survey folks saying that they want everything left alone, again, I question that. And I hope that when the commission looks at this, is they take more attention to the open house. Because there you had 78 people that signed their piece of paper that says, I was at this meeting. And of those 70, about 40% responded some way or another, either on the open mic or placing stickers on the various 11 categories. And of those 11 categories, as you identified, 5 of them had where most of them were. And the biggest one had to do with restrictions. They want to restrict where you put them and how big they can be. The other thing too, on point number 2, is why are we having to reinvent the wheel? Let's look at what our neighbors have done. Not necessarily what general practice is, but look at what our neighbors have done to the east of us, which is Butler County. On August 29th, they approved their resolution. They have severely restricted the amount of areas of Butler County, and I have a map here that I'll be glad to leave with you guys. This is the map that says this is where you can and cannot put solar or wind turbines. Also in Butler County, as noted, that the cities have a 3-mile buffer around them where they can't be a solar panel or a turbine facility put up, as well as the footprint of the solar projects can't be any larger than 5 square miles. Harvey County, it's similar county to Sedgwick, I think, in a dense population. Yes, they're a smaller county, but I think as far as the density and the relationship, it could be the same, where they came in and said, no, we do not want solar or wind turbines of large scale. They're okay with small, of less than 20 acres. And that ban was approved on November the 14th. As stated earlier, Reno County has banned wind turbine, and they're in the process right now of writing a solar one. They do not have one today. Okay, and lastly, I would like to say that we need to look at what is going on in our area, not what's happening in Timbuktu. Thank you.
Your timing's perfect. Thank you very much. All right, anybody else? Is there anybody else beyond this lady? Because we usually put a limit of 3 at committee meetings. All right, name and address, please.
Susan Erlenwine, Director of Environmental Resources for Sedgwick County, 1144 South Seneca. I was on the original group that developed the current regulations on solar farms, and I was at the public hearing and talked to a lot of citizens about their concerns. Also, county commissioners have shared their emails with me that they received on the solar farms. What I'd like to address are 2 concerns. Groundwater is a concern in some areas. It could be as shallow as 6 feet in Sedgwick County or down to 100 feet before you hit groundwater. The galvanized steel used in some areas has a coating that includes arsenic. And I know citizens are concerned about possible arsenic contamination of their groundwater. Another concern on solar cells is some of them are anti-reflective, but not all of them. The concern about not having anti-reflective is the glare for planes flying over if there happens to be a solar farm and a flight path of one of the many airports we have in Sedgwick County. Also, migratory birds that are waterfowl see solar panels. The glare looks like shimmering lakes. They dive down, crash. It doesn't help the solar farm cells, and it certainly kills the birds. So it would be good to have an additional statement within our code that says all materials used in the solar farm must first be approved by Sedgwick County. That way we can look at the material data sheets, determine the type of galvanized steel being used, what the coatings are, and should they have anti-reflective solar cells instead of ones that produce a glare. So those are my main concerns. A lot of the flooding is already taken care of. My position's in charge of the stormwater regulations for the county. I'd make sure there were best management practices, no runoff. I help fund the conservation district, and I'm on the board. We would make sure that there were pollinator plants put in place, no soil erosion. All of that's in place already, but I think there should be something additional to address the type of material used so the citizens can be sure that their groundwater and their area would not be harmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, since we have a few others, did someone else want to speak? Name and address, 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, it's Alan Kloss Anderson. I'm with the Pulsonelli Law Firm in our Kansas City office. I'm also adjunct professor of law at the University of Kansas School of Law in Lawrence. And I submitted a letter earlier. It wasn't in the packet, so if people haven't received that, we can provide another copy of that. But it involved some of the first topic that was discussed today, and that's the urban area of influence. And should something be done in the regulations in order to somehow enhance that? And I'm going to go through what's already in the ordinance to show that revision isn't necessary, because there's actually pretty extraordinary processes in place already that go beyond what you see in most places. So first, in section 3D6 P2F, it already states that an applicant shall provide an evaluation of potential impacts together with any plans for alleviating social and economic impacts on local governments. So initially, they'll already have to supply a report that looks into the topic and see if there are any impacts. Additionally, the notice is provided in any of these cities where the project's located in an area of influence, and they get a chance to participate. So if a planning commission within a city makes a recommendation that projects should not be approved, it goes to the planning commission, then the county commission, the joint one, and it requires a supermajority. So you already have a process in place that cities have incredible participation, through the process now. Plus, then it actually has what I think is always an extraordinary event, and I teach this as part of my class at the law school, where you've altered kind of the normal voting and now requires supermajority. So that's a pretty unique aspect to the ordinances already. So the process already has it. And the reason why that's pretty important is what you have are people that live in the unincorporated part of the county who don't have a chance to participate or vote for those people in the city who are on the planning commissions and otherwise. So if you go further beyond this, which you've already changed the kind of normal democracy and the voting requiring a simple majority, you're having people that don't get to vote for those people in that city, and they're having some of their property rights taken away. So that's a pretty extraordinary event when you're going to, impact someone's property rights without a chance to participate through voting and otherwise do something in that location. So you already have a process in place that I think goes pretty far in giving cities participation in that. And also, I'll just say, because obviously limited time, any of these other topics, again, I teach on this topic at the University of Kansas, have been worked in this. I've worked on most of the renewable projects around the state. If you run into a question, I'm happy to also answer questions, and as well as someone from Invenergy, Meredith, that'll be able to provide some input.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker?
Yeah, just a quick note on that one. I do believe that we did receive that communication and we have included it in the public comments packet. And I believe it was received prior to the last MAPC Advanced Plans meeting. So we may have included it in that packet instead of this one. But we do have it, and I can assure you, we'll distribute that to everyone following the meeting as a refresh for folks.
All right, thank you. Did you wish to speak as well? Yes. Same deal, name, address, 3 minutes, please.
Meredith Abdu. I'm with Invenergy. We're located at 1401 17th Street, Denver, Colorado. As far as, I just want to address some of the questions that came up, just to make sure that folks are getting the information. I think one of the items was around decommissioning. What does the 3 to 4 feet represent? So that represents infrastructure. It doesn't mean we're going to take 3 to 4 feet of soil across the entirety of the project and scrape it clean. We're just going to remove, if we have a solid concrete foundation, we'll remove that. If we have steel pilings, we'll remove that. So we are responsible for removing everything to 3 to 4 feet down, and that generally allows for the land to return to an agricultural purpose. I think the other thing was around topsoil preservation. I know we had Greg Braun here, who's our vegetation manager, at the last meeting. Topsoil is extremely important to us. It's extremely important to our landowners. And so that is something where if we are removing topsoil, we are banking it. We're not just taking that and mixing it in. Like, we are actually banking that topsoil, putting it aside, storing it so that we can later take that and spread it back across the site. There were some items around height. And as far as the height, just to explain how these typical solar panels are set is you'll have a foundation, like a steel foundation, steel piling, and you'll put the solar panel on top. And that solar panel will rotate. So it will follow the sun. So it might start and it'll face the east in the morning, and then by the afternoon it'll face the west. Sorry, I'm trying to hit the microphone here and do a little dance. But so when we talk about height, like, that's where it's not like you're going to have a steel pile 35 feet in the air. It's just that the max height of when the panel is actually tilted, that's where you would hit, and that would be that max height restriction. I think that in many cases it won't be that high. Sometimes you might have that if you have flooding. The panels, when it's tilted down, the panels cannot be touching water. And so you just have to do the engineering to understand what that height is and what it needs to be as the panels rotate throughout the day. And then I think the final thing I want to talk about was just on the setbacks. We talked about this a little bit at the last meeting. But I want to comment on Mr. Zimbelman's note about if you look at 3 to 5 mile setbacks from the areas of urban influence, what you will take out is you will take 86% of the county out. And so 540,000 acres you would eliminate from solar development. So that is the large majority of the county. That is all. I just want to see if there are any questions.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you, that was very helpful. All right, is there anyone else here who would like to speak? All right, let's bring it back to the committee for discussion. Any discussion?
And I'm happy to provide just a little bit of a recap of some of the items that were addressed amongst all of you. We discussed the 35-foot height. I believe it was discussed potentially reducing that for solar projects specifically. I know that decommissioning was potentially adding items regarding decommissioning to the current zoning code as it relates to removing that soil once the project itself is decommissioned, as well as providing some form of financial guarantee as part of that decommissioning section in the code. Is there any other topics that were brought up that I may have missed or anything that anybody would like to potentially add? And this would be for potential changes or text changes to the Unified Zoning Code itself.
John?
How much time and effort have we done on, 2 or 3 people have talked about construction? Right off the start, we're talking about putting galvanized piles in the ground and everything, and some of them I've seen that they do a footing type situation like that young lady said over there. And I guess have we spent much time on what we can do and cannot do as far as construction of these things, or set some kind of a standard on those, or is that out of line as far as the solar people are concerned? I guess is my question as much as anything.
Yeah, I think we've looked at, we would look to MABCD to inform us about the structural issues, and whether or not what's being proposed is sufficient for permits to be issued. In terms of being more specific about what types of configuration of the solar panels, we do ask for information on what the panels themselves will consist of. And so we're kind of in the middle of the road in terms of, we know, but I think Susan Erlewine, who again, I just want to emphasize is a staff member, has commented that she recommends that we would include a review and approval of the materials that would be used. So I think it's a wide-ranging topic, and so right now we would be informed about what materials, but we don't have standards about what types of solar. But again, one of the recommendations you're receiving from staff is to at least have the materials reviewed and approved.
Which I think sounds like a very good idea. Right, any other comments? Tony?
I had the opportunity to spend 2 or 3 days in Palm Springs in October, and down there, they have parking lots where the solar panels are basically a roof under where you can park underneath them, which brought up the question to me, what if somebody wants to put a solar panel on top of a parking garage or on top of the Sedgwick County building? Are we trying to regulate that also?
Great question, and this is one that comes up quite a bit, so I'm glad that you asked it. So what we're looking at here are the regulations for properties that the primary use would be for utility or commercial scale solar. Not situations where, like Mays High School, where the principal use is the school and the educational facility, and then an ancillary use that they have, an accessory use that they have, is that they have a solar panel field next to it. So this has also come up with homes, single-family homes. So we're not talking about regulating the solar panels that are on top of those houses as part of this section of the zoning code. Another one that's come up has been the chip manufacturing facility that's been talked about, and I understand that part of their plans would include a solar facility, or at least they're exploring that. And again, we're not talking about that scale where it's an ancillary use or an accessory to a more principal use. This is really focused on like solar farms, utility, and commercial scale.
All right, any other discussion, comments? Clarify for me, or Kurt or somebody, do we need to vote on this, or do we consensus or changes from public feedback? Do we just simply state we have a consensus, or?
I'll offer some insights on this. So what we're asking for from you all today is to get a sense of whether or not you feel, and this is really about your thoughts on what you think meets the needs of the community. What is the right fit for Wichita and Sedgwick County when it comes to these utility and commercial scale solar facilities and the regulations that are in the zoning code, and also what the comprehensive plan says. Now, what we've presented to you today is, and through the course of the last couple meetings, we've talked about the public input that's been collected so far. We've done a quick review of best practices related to these kind of highlighted topics. And now we're looking to you and we're saying, okay, with this public input and with this best practices and also with the state of practice for the adjoining counties and communities, do you, in your thoughts, do we need to make adjustments? What's the right fit for Sedgwick County and Wichita in terms of the regulations? So today, if we can get just by consensus, kind of a sense of like, or if you want to vote and make it that formalized, that works well for us, what those changes should be. You don't have to have the actual text put together, but give us the concept and we can come up with what the text should be in order to get you there. And then that will allow us to move forward with additional meetings to review and revise as needed. Is that helpful?
Yes, it is for me. John?
One of the speakers mentioned, I think the young lady did, that 86% of the county can't use because of the rules we have on the 3 to 5 mile radius thing. So that's what, 86% of the county was, couldn't do it because of that rule? Is that what she said?
I think you can ask for clarification, but I believe that that was if a restriction was to be imposed that would prohibit these types of solar facilities from being installed in those areas, that it would restrict the amount of county area that could be used for this would be substantially smaller, but you can ask for a clarification.
Well, you know, when we went through this with the wind farms, we designated areas in which they could go. And that would help me make some decision of if that is a true fact, that 86% or whatever that percentage might be, I'd like to know exactly what we're talking about, because I made the comment a while ago, 3 small cities to the west could go together, put a co-op type deal in, and maybe get around or work together with that situation. And I'd like to know, you know, what we're talking about.
If I can, I'm going to turn to Meredith real quick, because Meredith, I believe that there was a memo or letter that was submitted that did have those graphics in it. Is that correct? Okay. What we can do is we can actually, we've got a couple options. We can, I don't know how long you want to go with this meeting, but we could try and pull up that information on the fly and pull up that memo so that you can see that illustrated area. Or we can distribute it afterwards. I'm open to whatever you would prefer.
Well, the reason I think a continuation of the process is fine for us to say, go ahead and continue the progress in what we've done so far. But these are some of the specifics that I'd like to come in before I say yea or nay.
Well, I think we'll all have a chance to have specifics at some point. This final document is going to come before MAPC. I think at this stage of the process, as I understand this recommended action of consensus on changes from public feedback, I think we have gotten excellent public feedback. I think staff has responded to everything that's been brought up. Even in the meeting today, I think there were suggested changes like the review of materials. And I personally think we need to, that 3 to 5 miles seems excessive to me, quite a bit excessive. I think we need to find a smaller number or a better solution to decide what is an appropriate distance from a community that will not interfere with their growth, but will still permit a larger percentage of the county to be at least possibly used for commercial solar. That would be the comment I would make. But I think the 5 of us who are here simply need to let staff know whether they're moving in the right direction, whether they've received the kind of input that gives them guidance to know where to move, and whether we can proceed with this. So, Scott?
Sorry to be talking so much, but if it's helpful, what I'd like to do is, Justin or Ty-Ben, I'd like to go one by one through the topics that have been brought up, and then check in with you for each topic to check and see if individuals on this committee think that there should be any changes to the existing regulations. And then by the end of that process, that will indicate to us whether or not there are changes that we should be looking into and exploring. Would that be helpful, as opposed to trying to cover all of them at once right now?
That may clarify things for everybody. And to me, what we're trying to do here is to make sure staff has what they need to proceed, right? So let's move. Can we?
Yeah, we can kind of go back, I guess, to the beginning of the presentation, just to the urban development and growth page, Ty-Ben. But basically, again, just to kind of reiterate, the existing Unified Zoning Code does not provide specific language related to urban growth areas and large-scale utility solar. So that 3 to 5 mile dialogue came out of the survey, it came out of the town hall event, but we currently, just for clarification, do not have that in our zoning code as it stands now. So going back to the urban development and growth, the map is shown on this page here. Is there any suggestions from the Advanced Plans Committee or recommendations for text changes to the Unified Zoning Code that you would like to see on this specific topic?
Can I just point out to people on the committee that it's my understanding that these urban growth areas were determined based on the likely ability of a community to extend its utility system to support potential development. So this is, at the time it was done, it was like a 10-year? What was the planning period of the investment plan? I'm sorry, I'm losing it.
Originally about 20 years. It was updated though just a couple of years ago. But it still
Okay.
goes out to 2035.
Okay, so to 2035, this is the best estimate of where these communities might possibly actually expand their development, residential, commercial, whatever. So anything beyond that is basically likely to be agricultural and in 2035. That's what this map is saying. So having said that, how big of a potential area around each of these cities, as I understand what was in that recommendation on the 3 to 5 miles, it's 3 to 5 miles beyond the urban growth area. And that just seems radically excessive to me. What does everybody else think?
And I would just highlight that there is the existing process. Keep in mind that there's the existing process that if an application came in the growth area for Derby, that they would have the formal opportunity to have their planning commission review it, weigh in on it, and that recommendation would carry forward in the process. At the same time as you're discussing this one, I'll let you have the dialogue, but then I'm gonna go back and see if we can pull up that document on the screen also that has been referred to in terms of the areas that would be excluded.
Okay, and can we go back one slide, which I think has the list of what's actually different from, maybe 2 slides?
I don't
There we
know.
go. Now that, am I understanding correctly, Justin? This is the list of what would be different from our existing zoning regulations.
Right, so our existing zoning regulations, we currently do not have any kind of language specific to urban development and growth areas. That 3 to 5 mile outside of urban growth areas, that was never a specific recommendation. That wasn't something that we found while researching best practices. That was just the big takeaway from the public survey and the town hall event. So when doing research of the best practices, there was not any specific literature or academic research or anything like that talking about the benefits or negatives of placing a large-scale utility solar system in an urban growth area. So the research on this particular topic was limited, and as I mentioned before, our current code, we don't have any kind of specific regulations on it. But again, that 3 to 5 miles outside of the urban growth area, that was just sort of the trend of a lot of the feedback that we received via public survey and via the town hall event.
Joe?
I would like to see a map that would show 1, 3, and 5 mile designation and how much land would actually be available for solar development. Do we have that?
I think we're getting there. I know that Scott is, if you refer to the screen on the page here, I believe that the document supplied by Invenergy is shown on the screen here. And this document, correct me if I'm wrong, depicts the 3 mile setbacks from the urban areas of influence. I can't speak to the document itself personally because I did not create it. But
So the white area would be the only place you could develop?
that is correct.
And it looks to me like these are basically, well, no, they are they, can someone tell me if these are 3 miles or 5 miles, or can you stand up and come to the, and tell us what we're actually looking at? Is this 3 miles or 5 miles, and is it outside the city limits, or is it outside the city's urban growth area?
So what this represents, the areas in red, the red outlines, those are the areas of urban influence, areas of urban growth. So those, and then the lighter red, the shading, that is the 3 mile setback from the limits of the urban areas of influence.
Okay, so 3 miles outside urban growth areas, and if it went 5 miles, I think there'd basically be like 1.5 inches of the southwest corner of the county that would be still available. So does that clarify for you, John, what you wanted? Scott?
Yeah, one quick note on this, and JR pointed this out, is that this accounts for the urban growth areas for the smaller cities. It does not account for the urban growth area for the city of Wichita. So in effect, there would be even more area that would not be allowed if you based it on Wichita's as well.
Okay. I personally think the urban growth areas are already defining where the cities are likely to actually really grow, and thank you for your clarification. I myself would think that the 3 to 5 miles in addition isn't necessary. Even 1 mile in addition might be more than is really necessary, but that's the question I'm asking the rest of you to comment on.
Well, like Scott said earlier, any one of those cities can come in and make application to change their area of influence.
Yes, they
At any
can.
time. So if you're going to use that as a guideline, then you need to do something. If they come in and ask for an extension of their, because they are growing faster than we thought they were going to, what are you going to do with something if it all of a sudden falls within that 3 to 5 mile or whatever the rule we end up going with? If it's illegal or it's out of conformity, or, it's got to be something to cover the investment done by the energy people.
Well, and every single individual project is going to have a whole process to go through as well. That's why, to me, this blanket restriction just seems excessive. And I understand it was never proposed as an actual revision to our zoning regulations. It was simply a comment that was made more than once in some of the public input. But as much as I think the public input has been helpful in a lot of ways, this one seems to me to be basically attempting to just make it impossible to do commercial solar in Sedgwick County, and I don't think that's appropriate, in my personal opinion.
I'd like to just see 1 mile and see what that looks like.
1 mile outside the city limits or 1 mile outside the urban growth areas of each city?
The latter.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify. Okay, so have we covered that topic and given staff our opinion?
I guess what I'm trying to see, is there any other area that's developable besides the southwest part of the county?
And Kirk Sponsel, Deputy County Councilor, certainly Scott can override me if he wants to, but I think just to clarify the role of what's going on today, I think it might be best to describe this as getting input from the members today, getting their areas of influence, and maybe ultimately at the end of this session, if it were preferred, the motion might be for to instruct staff going forward to review the information and the questions that have been raised today, continue getting input and information, and then potentially even starting to preliminarily form some language based off of interest, based off of guidance provided today. So that might be how we consider approaching today, is getting the broad outlines and kind of directing staff to further delve into specific details. Scott, is that accurate of what you're looking for, or?
Yeah, I would say yes. The importance of this meeting and why this conversation is really, really helpful for us is because given the time constraints that we have in terms of trying to deliver any recommendations for changes to the BOCC by March 20th of this year, it means that we have to go out and start soliciting additional input and feedback on potential changes in January, which is, so any information that we get from you, Joe, you've indicated saying, hey, let's look at 1 mile out and see what that looks like. That's enough for us to even have a conversation with folks to say the MAPC Advanced Plans is interested in looking at these buffers surrounding communities, and currently they're looking at investigating what the 1 mile would look like. That's enough for us to take out to other groups and get some feedback on it as well, so we can continue moving this dialogue forward. Now, the challenge that's going to happen for you all is that at some point, you've got to make a recommendation, Advanced Plans does, I hope you do, to the full MAPC. And the window for doing that is, it's not significant. So you've got a lot of work between now and then. And so if you want to get the information back about what that map looks like for 1 mile, my question for you would be, when do you want to see it? Do you want to see it next week? Do you want to see it 2 weeks from now?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow? I mean, we can do it, and we can do it digitally, and we can send it out, but then when do you want to get together as a group and kind of discuss it?
Well, and at what is the deadline for this committee to make a final recommendation on changes to the zoning regulations regarding commercial solar to the MAPC?
We had,
Some comfort.
we had February 8th, I believe it was, somewhere in that. I'm sorry, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I believe it was early in February. I think it was the 8th, whatever that Thursday is. And the reason why is because we anticipated that the MAPC would be taking it up 2 weeks from that date, that the full MAPC would take it up. So that's why the schedule is so tight so important for January.
Deborah?
So basically, we have 2 more meetings, the 2 January meetings of this committee to get our part done.
And I would add that, in addition, we are scheduled to present this to the Sedgwick County Association of Cities at their January meeting. So we're going to take whatever feedback we get in between now and then and share that with them. We are also scheduled tentatively to present at a Board of County Commissioners staff meeting to give them an update on where we're at, kind of the feedback that we're hearing and what direction it's headed. So all of those are going to be important touch points that we can bring back information from those conversations to you in advance of your early February meeting, so that you will have that input and feedback before you make a recommendation of full MAPC.
Joe?
I'm really concerned, based on what we've heard from Scott over the last few months, about the staff time this is taking versus all the cases we have to process. And I hate to see this overshadow, if you will, the specific cases that we have.
Well, and what I can do to add some assistance with that is that we're real fortunate in that we've got Justin here, and he's new and he's jumped right into it. And so he's been working hard on this. The other thing is that we have Mary, who's been helping out, keeping this moving, and then Momita is coming back. She'll be returning at around the first of the year. So our advanced plans division will be up to 3 people, as opposed to before we've been operating with just 2 and trying to handle all the other types of things. So I just want to emphasize that Justin and the advanced plans team are working on different projects than the cases, but I very much appreciate, Joe, that you're very conscientious about our current plans caseload as well. And so, yeah, it's just, we've got that target date of March, and we're doing what we can to do it. Unfortunately, we've got divisions that are getting fully staffed that can help accomplish that.
And I agree with Joe. I don't want to overload staff either. I think as a committee, what we can do to help is to simply, at a certain point, stop asking for more information. I think we've gotten plenty of information. We've gotten a great deal of public feedback. We should still keep listening, but at a certain point, we need to start making some decisions, and I think we're pretty close to it, of what we want to ask staff to change in our zoning regulations and what we think is fine the way it is. That's what they need to know from us. And so I think we're getting to specifics now, and we should be. We've only got a couple more meetings when we can continue to ask staff to provide us with more data. John?
Well, I'll try to start off with this. 3 things that I think that we talked about today is, one, I feel that we don't have a construction standard, whether it be concrete, we've talked about driving piles galvanized into the ground for pollution and environmental study from that standpoint, because environmental height, I think, is excessive. Even though it rotates, it doesn't rotate that much difference, I wouldn't think. And also the distance from the areas of influence of the towns in the county.
Can I just say, my own personal confusion is which part of this is zoning regulations and which part is going to be construction codes? And I'm hoping you guys can straighten that out for us.
Well, and what I take away from that statement about the construction standards is that the construction standards are coming up because of concerns about contamination. Is that right?
Yes, the environmental. We had two people speak today about the water. Two people speak about the water pollution because of certain reasons.
And what we've heard from the staff who work on environmental health, Susan's come up and provided the recommendation that from her perspective, it would be helpful if all the materials are reviewed and approved, need to be approved. Then my question then would be, do you feel like that would address the concerns that you've heard about contamination?
Well, the way I understand the contamination, every time we've talked about it, it's driving galvanized steel into the ground so far, whatever, and getting into the water supply. All right, if you put a footing foundation type deal, similar to, and I hate to use this as an example, similar to what they do with the wind generation deals. They're set on big concrete slabs and stuff like this that doesn't get the direct conflict with the materials that's being used. You can use a spread footing type situation with these. I think you can. I wouldn't know why you couldn't.
If I may, would it be okay to have Susan come up and talk a little bit about how her recommendation could address, how the process with her recommendation would address those concerns and contamination issues? Would that be okay?
I'm fine with that. Susan, would you come up and respond to Mr. McKay's concerns?
Deborah, do you see us needing to have a quorum? I'm thinking about leaving. I have a meeting at 11:30.
We actually, because Mr. Dool is here, would still have a quorum, so thank you for.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I heard the same concerns about the galvanized steel, but it was mainly due to the type of coatings that are on some galvanized steel that have arsenic in it, but not all of them have that. So by having material data sheets provided on that, or the fact that that's encased with concrete, however they're going to build it, if we first approve that, we can assure that for that particular site, the groundwater would not be contaminated. As I said before, groundwater could be 6 foot down in a very sandy soil, or it could be 100 foot down in eastern part of the county. So it's site specific. And I know that Invergy has very good plans, but they may not be the only company that comes into our county that wants to build a solar farm. Therefore, something that we could put in there, such as we must approve all materials that are used in building the solar farm, would address whatever company's coming in. First, we look at the materials and approve it before they can proceed, or we say, no, this is not what we would want in this area. We prefer this other material, and work with them to make sure it's appropriate for the site.
Okay,
I hope that answered your question.
Does that, John? All right, well, I think that, yeah, I think that is a good question, and I think that's a good answer, and having the materials review and approval would address the potential problem.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other, and please note for the record that Joe left. So we're down to 4, but we still have a quorum. Scott?
I would add then, so the first one that came up was the construction standards and contamination, and that it sounds like that likely would be addressed by the recommendation that Susan has provided, and that's something we can work on in terms of bringing back to you. Second thing then has been height, and an indication, at least one member has indicated that a height of 35 they feel is too much. Something that we can do is continue to do research. We've looked at some best practices. We've looked at what other communities are doing, but we're more than happy to continue doing research into what are some options in terms of height? I don't have them with me today, but I'm sure we could explore some. But I get the sense that the height is coming up in this conversation because of concerns about visual impacts to adjoining properties or nearby properties. Is that right? Okay. So, so we can do some research based on that. And then the third thing has been the distance from the cities, and that there's, we've got a specific request to look at a 1 mile buffer around the communities, and we can certainly do that. Yeah, I think those are the things that we can move forward with. And I'm trying to think, there was something else related to that. And then there's a fourth, no,
We're still working our way through the list. But can I ask you to come up to I have a question for you about height. So you helped explain that it's the rotation of the panel that increases the height, effective height above the actual point of connection between the panel and the support structure. How high, and that of course would depend on how big the individual panels are. So is 35 feet reasonable? Is a lower height reasonable? How big are these panels? And even if they were done in a flood zone where they had to be higher than usual to allow for potential flooding under them, what's a reasonable height for a restriction on height on these things?
So I think for that, what I would like to do is take that back to our engineers and actually look. It's very site specific, it's very technology specific. So technology evolves, the panels evolves, the design and the length of them. And so we can absolutely provide feedback to Scott and Justin on what we've seen. They've already done a number of feedback to see what other counties have done. But I think that we can let you know. I do think there's a realm there where that height can be reduced. I just don't have an exact number on me today.
All right, thank you. I would just say, if 35 feet is the standard height in that zoning district, maybe being consistent with that makes sense, even though the panels may or may not ever actually get that high. Scott, did you want to say something?
not on that topic.
All right. Tony?
So if you're looking for input, this is my input. If the goal is to expand our energy grid, which is what I think we're talking about, I don't see these or envision these popping up all over the place because they're very expensive, I'm assuming. So I think we need a basic set of guidelines. And then if Cheney and Garden Plain want to get together and bring us a plan for a solar field that's going to service their area, we look at it. We don't have to just say, well, it's not within the boundary, so no. We don't need those boundaries. I might go with 1 mile or something, but I think our goal is to encourage it, but control it a little bit. So I don't think we need to get clear down in the weeds on the thing. It's just the basic guidelines.
I would agree. I think what we need is the basic set of standards, but with the understanding that any individual project that comes along is going to get reviewed in the specifics. We can deal with the specifics for each individual project.
And I think the whole conversation has been really good. And I think the conversation about the boundaries and distances is especially kind of an intricate one. It's a difficult one. And one thing that I would offer is that the zoning code specifies really kind of like minimum, like you shall do this, you shall do that, you cannot do this. But the comprehensive plan provides guidance that's more flexible. And so one opportunity that you have is that if you feel strongly about something, but not so strongly that you think it needs to be an absolute requirement, but that you think it's an important and critical factor that needs to be included and considered, you can include it in the comprehensive plan. And for instance, say, we strongly discourage commercial utility scale solar to be located within X distance of a city and its urban growth area or whatever. So I just want to remind you that the code is the regulations, the zoning code, but the comprehensive plan can provide guidance where you can be a little bit more flexible too.
All right, thank you. That's a good point. And just for whatever it's worth, for the heck of it, I did a word search on our existing comprehensive plan, the Community Investments Plan, and the title tells you a lot, on the words ecology, environment, sustainability, and carbon, and got back virtually nothing. So that tells you what our existing comprehensive plan is focused on. But I don't think that necessarily means we ignore all those issues in our work here. Okay, so that's areas and setbacks, and next?
Okay, so technically, that was urban development and growth.
Right.
Some of that did bleed into that, but I do have Scott's notes and your comments on that regarding height, construction materials, distance, potentially considering a 1 mile versus a 3 mile to pursue. So the next topic that we were on was, I believe it was decommissioning. So if we could go to the next slide, please, or maybe 2 slides from there. Again, what the best practices indicate here was potentially adding a depth specified by the ordinance, specified by the code of 3 to 4 feet. And then financial assurance was discussed amongst the group, having the owner or operator provide a surety bond or a letter of credit. So those were the 2 topics that came up during the first go around. Is there any further discussion, or is there a consensus to have staff start looking into those 2 items specifically to potentially include in the code?
It's my understanding that the financial assurance is not an unusual request or obligation, that if a development needs to do streets and street lighting and sewer, there's some sort of financial surety provided. So it's a fairly standard practice for any arrangement between a private developer and a city, and I don't think we're asking too much to include it. Yes, Bob.
So, just for clarification, we would be requiring a surety bond or a letter of credit for possibly up to 30 years on behalf of the owner developer of this thing. Is that correct?
I don't know if a date or length of time was specified there. I mean, that's certainly up to our purview based on what we want to require of the owner. So that's open to discussion as far as what you'd like to include. We can look at those years.
Well, it seems to me that's a pretty long time for somebody to have to keep a bond in place, and at the same time, what the purpose of the bond is to assure that something's going to happen 30 years from now. That's my comment.
I would offer up Kirk. I would volunteer Kirk to help address that.
Kirk Sponsel, Deputy County Counselor. I'm wondering if some language could just be simply bond shall cover the life of the project and a necessary, decommissioning. That's about as simplistic as I could come off the cuff.
Okay, John?
One other thing is, I don't imagine in every case, or how many cases, a lot of this land is leased. So who's posted the bond, the landowner or the people doing the solar system?
It would be the applicant.
No, I understand that, but
right.
There's some type of a financial responsibility there to the landowner. You need to be careful of that, because I don't think it's any different than oil wells and the windmill things. I think it'll be the same type of.
Yeah, but would that be part of the regulations, or would that be part of the individual contract between the landowner and the?
So I think some of that does delve into it. I mean, I think we can certainly look at finessing the language when it comes into it, into who is required to submit the financial assurance. Is it the applicant, or how is that divvied up? I think we can look at that language.
Okay, good question. Any other comments on the decommissioning issue?
So just before we move forward, just so I'm aware, the one item that we would like to take from the best practices and have staff pursue going forward would be the financial assurance aspect. And the removal would you like to consider depth as well in terms of the decommissioning of the system itself, or?
I think all four of these things sound pretty good myself. To be included in our zoning regulations, to have some sort of, not length of time after decommissioning is started, there needs to be some sort of deadline, I would think, in order that they don't just, sort of decommission for 10 or 15 years and leave the stuff there while they're in the process. I'd like to think no company would be that way, but, we have some experiences in this town of companies being that way. So having something to head that off sounds like a good idea to me.
Okay, and I can also add that our current plan, we do have, in our current regulations, we do require a decommissioning plan that requires that plan be updated every 5 years. And then at the end of the project's life, we require that everything be removed. But yeah, like the length of time needed to complete decommissioning, I don't think is directly addressed in our current regulations. And then the notification by the owner or operator that will notify the local government, I don't think is specifically stated in there, but we can certainly look into those 4 items further.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on this topic from any members on the committee? Okay, next.
Okay, I think it'll be.
Who's back there? Is it Ty Ben or is it?
Yeah, I think it's Ty Ben. 2 slides from here, please, Ty Ben. That will take us to groundwater contamination. Again, our current code addresses soils and stormwater. And we do require an environmental assessment that is to EPA standards to address the project's impact on habitat, wildlife, soils, how the project will address stormwater drainage, soil erosion, sediment control, etc. So we currently have that in place. Again, a lot of the best practices that we saw recommended also requiring some sort of new native or pollinator-friendly ground cover. I know that it was discussed at the last meeting that a lot of the projects already kind of do that. But yeah, is there any further discussion on this particular topic or anything that you would like to add that's not in our current code?
Any comments? I mean, the comment was made that stormwater management, that drainage and erosion were all pretty much already addressed, so it was more a matter of soil preservation, topsoil preservation and restoration after, as part of decommissioning. As long as that's addressed in some way.
Yeah, the soils.
This is fine print. I'm having trouble figuring out which one is the exact one that would apply, but.
Yeah, I mean, again, these are just best practices of items that were frequent, that are outside of what our current code requires. And our current soils and stormwater portion of our code is pretty comprehensive in terms of requiring how the project will impact that site from an environmental standpoint. As I mentioned before, how grading, revegetation will affect the site. The applicant shall provide an evaluation of potential impacts together with any plans and proposals for alleviating any social and economic impacts. So really, the current code as it stands right now in soils and stormwater does address the environmental concerns to an EPA standard.
Okay. I just, again, that seems to be more erosion focused, and I think the comments that were made about retaining and topsoil to put it back over anything that's removed after decommissioning is an important point that should maybe be addressed specifically. Any other questions or comments on this particular section of what we're talking about? All right, Scott?
Yeah, just a quick one. Because it mentions contamination, I would just highlight, you already know this, but that, the recommendation that Susan Erlenwine made about materials reviewed and approved, I think the conversation has largely been that would help address some of the public input concerns about contamination, which has been highlighted as part of this focus and area.
Yeah, I think in general, we're looking at trying to prevent contamination rather than deal with it afterwards. Do we need to have a set of language in here that would allow the potential to deal with it afterwards if there's some weird chemical that we're not even aware of as an environmental contaminant right now turns out to be a problem later? Or is that something that would have to be dealt with later?
I think it's a good question, and I'll defer to Susan on that one.
I think
you,
we could
Susan.
add language about testing the groundwater before the project starts to see what the level of different chemicals are in it. And during decommissioning, you could also test the groundwater to see if there's been any contamination.
Does that sound like a good idea to you, with your background
Yes.
being what it is?
One thing that protects the company, arsenic can occur naturally in groundwater. So if you have a beginning level of what chemicals are in the groundwater before a project, and then again afterwards, you know if there's been any impact.
All right, I think that sounds pretty reasonable too. John?
They mentioned earlier about maybe putting these in a floodway or floodplain situation.
Floodplains, you could have water runoff from an area, but I think it'd be pretty minor in that case, because you're talking about structures. It'd be like if you had a metal barn and the water ran against it and ran off. You're not going to get much from that minimal contact.
From your perspective, is this a reasonable use of 500 or 100-year floodplain as compared to other development, or should it all just be agricultural?
I've seen parks used in floodplains. I've seen ag in that area. I don't see where it would be that detrimental.
So again, it's one of those, the specific project proposed would have to be evaluated at the time to see
Yes.
whether it made sense. Okay. I think that's reasonable. Can I just look over here for a nod? Is this do developers of commercial solar have any interest in doing these in floodplains, or do you usually try to avoid them?
Our base standard is to try and avoid where we can. I think
Sorry, that was more answer than a nod, so have to go up and.
our base standard is that we would try and avoid a floodplain if all possible. But that being said, we go out and we do actual field studies. We get hydrology studies done. We look at the topography of the land. We look at how water is going to flow. And so for us, we have to design based on certain instances of, a 100-year floodplain event. We have to make sure that the panels aren't going to touch and impact water. And sometimes you might be able to site in certain areas, again, depending on how land constrained you are. But that's where our engineers will design, and we might have to raise panels up if you are in an area where you do have a 100-year event, and you have to make sure that you're above that.
Okay, thank you. So it's unlikely but possible that a commercial solar facility might end up at least partially in floodplain, and we'd have to deal with it.
Yes, and we would work with the county because there's floodplain permitting that we would have to understand how that all works.
Okay, thank you very much. All right.
So some of these details like this strike me as being more a part of enforcement of these things rather than we're talking about a overall change to the zoning code, correct?
Well, yeah, but they'll be enforcing the zoning code, so what we're doing is talking about what kind of tools the enforcement arm would have to enforce with, right?
Well, and I think also the conversation is really, at least as around floodplains, is you've just had a conversation about should they be restricted and kept out of floodplains and floodways, and then also if they are allowed, if that's a reasonable use, and what are the impacts that come from that in terms of contamination and other things. So I think it hasn't gone kind of logically that way, but I think the conversation has flowed about that. So, Mr. Dool, I think a good point, which is if you're not going to just, because you've got the option of using the code to prohibit them in those areas, but if it's a reasonable use and if you don't see the contamination issues, then as Mr. Dool's indicating, maybe you don't do it as part of the code, but maybe it becomes more of a per project, individual project evaluation. So you've got different levels of kind of regulation and review of these things that take place, especially because they're conditional uses.
But I would think within the zoning regulations, it allows you to be able to do that.
Yes.
That's what do you think he's talking about?
You can always, as a conditional use, you can always add additional conditions to a particular project. So the zoning code will specify what you have to absolutely, positively have to do as the minimums for the project, and then you can always add additional conditions onto a particular project.
So my thought, and I would like some response, is that we don't ask that commercial solar be outlawed in all floodplains, because this is Kansas, and some floodplains extend a long, long way from bodies of water. So it does eliminate a lot of possibilities. I would rather assume that the existing regulations that are in effect about any construction in floodplains would be sufficient to establish conditions for solar in a floodplain, should that ever happen. It sounds like it's not real likely, but that's my view on it. I'd like to know what the rest of y'all think. And a bunch of stares. Okay, that's I'll call that concurrence. Okay,
So-
groundwater and contamination. Anything else we need to discuss on this topic?
And just to clarify from a staff perspective, we discussed water testing before and after the project. That's the item that you would like us to pursue on this particular topic.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then moving on to our last topic, I think it would be 2 slides from now, Ty-Ben. This one's great. Perfect. Setbacks, size and configuration. Again, we touched upon this topic a little bit toward the beginning of our discussion about height. Right now, our current regulations require that the system shall not exceed 35 feet in height. So we have, I believe, that one noted, sort of explore the height and whether or not these particular systems should be at a different minimum. And then are there any other topics on here regarding height or size or setbacks specifically that we haven't addressed?
Any questions or comments from anyone?
We haven't decided on our setbacks. You just got the list and went from 10 feet to 100 feet. So.
Well, as far,
Wasn't it
yeah,
40 feet?
Our current setback is 40 feet. And it's, they shall be set back 40 feet from the project boundary line and the public rights of way.
And to me, that's the standard, and it makes sense because it allows room for screening vegetation. Do you think it needs to be more than that? Are you saying?
No,
or?
I just said that examples were used from 10 feet to 100 feet.
Okay.
To get to our 40 feet.
Okay. To me, 40 feet sounds reasonable. Scott?
Well, I didn't want to jump in on setbacks, but the other portion is size and configuration. And what I would like to offer is that a lot of the information we've provided is really focused on setbacks, and we know that size and configuration has been a topic of discussion, a pretty intense discussion And so what I would like to offer is we've gotten some really valuable feedback from you on a variety of different topics. I would like to take a little bit more of a deeper dive on size and configuration and then come back as we're bringing additional material to you and revisit that specific topic.
I agree with that. I know that there are some of these commercial solar facilities that are enormous, square miles after square miles. And I think we ought to at least look at the possibility of putting some sort of an upper limit. I would think our general spread of cities and developed land and topography would prevent that sort of enormous facility, but do we want to make sure it doesn't happen in Sedgwick County? John?
What would the limitation of the number of acres or square miles that we have left in the county, would that limit do anything to do with the limitation of it? Or you want like a 5-acre maximum or a 10-acre maximum or a 100-acre maximum?
I'm not recommending anything, but I do believe that we can do some more research into finding out what other communities have done, just because from the presentation I received about Douglas County Johnson County, I know that they've got some, at least they talked about some restrictions, and so I'd like to at least be able to bring that information forward to you. So I think we've done a really good job on the setbacks, but I'd like to do a little bit deeper dive on the size and configuration aspect of this topic.
I'd like to at least know what a county similar to ours is expected to do. John, did you have something?
Well, I just asked the young lady, what's the average size that,
Would you come up once more, please? And what is the average size? What is the maximum size of one of these facilities in this part of the world?
There's a wide range. So right now in Kansas, what we see is these facilities are starting to get larger and larger. So like you have mentioned, facilities can range anywhere from a couple acres to thousands of acres. And so it depends on the contract that we have to interconnect. So we are applying for a certain amount of capacity interconnecting into local substations, and the amount of capacity we have as that gets bigger from 100 megawatts to 200 megawatts, 300 megawatts, the size of the facility will grow from there. So there's not like a fixed limit of, hey, it can only be this amount. We have not encountered that. I know some counties in Kansas are looking at that, but most of the places we go, we are seeking voluntary agreements with landowners. And so those landowners, if they want to be a part of the project, we do our best to then make them a part of the project.
All right, thank you. I'm in the back of my head is the image from, some places like in Nevada where it's literally enormous miles and miles of stuff. But again, we have the opportunity on each individual project to specify conditions as it comes up. So we may be able to handle it that way, but I would like staff to find out if there are standard limits that might be good to include in our zoning regulations, or whether we can just count on individual project review to handle any potential excesses that might come up in the future. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so I think is that it on this topic? Are we ready to make our motion?
I believe so, yes.
All right, so would someone care to try it, or should I make a stab? And I'm getting fingers pointed at me. All right, I would move that we recommend to staff that they take our consensus on changes from public feedback and pursue the items noted in the meeting today for extra research before we have our next meeting. Is that a good enough motion? Do I have a second? Thank you, Tony. We have a motion from Foster and a second from Zimmelman to what I said. Okay, any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say no. Motion carries 4-0. All right, thank you. That was extremely useful, I think. All right, and the next item on the agenda is public comments. Is there anyone here who would like to comment on anything other than what they've already commented on? Seeing none, our next meeting is Thursday, January 11th, 2024 at 10 a.m. in this location, and I hope to see you all then. Meeting adjourned.